Tell you.
All right, welcome to the post game. This is brought to you by ArchCitySports.com. I'm Nick Yale along with Jeremy Karp. This is the first installment of the new podcast going on for ArchCitySports.com. Jeremy, you want to tell the folks a little about yourself?
Well, I have plenty of broadcasting experience. I am a journalist of nearly 5 years and currently am enrolled in St. Charles Community College. And I'm pretty well set in what I do for Arch City Sports. This will be my third year coming up writing for Arch City Sports. And Nick, how about yourself? What about you?
Well, I'm a senior broadcast major down at the good old University of Missouri. Been on with Arch City for about a year now. I've been a little bit over a year. Cover mostly Mizzou and a little St. Louis soccer. So pretty excited to get this ball rolling. We have about 124,000 followers on Facebook.
Exactly.
And
rising.
And rising, and about 12,000 on Twitter. So if any of you guys have any questions for us, you can post on Facebook or tweet at us at Arch City Sports on Twitter your questions, and we will answer a couple on the podcast here. We had a few of you guys post comments on the Facebook page, so we'll get to some of those questions later. But first off, you want to talk about Cardinals baseball?
Oh, yeah. Now, despite the loss last night, that 1-0 loss that at first seemed like was going to end on a pickoff, and thankfully it didn't, because any loss, the way it ends is bad. But to see it end on a pickoff would have been just devastating. But despite that, the Cardinals are now 33-18. They're still well in first place in the National League Central.
Best record in baseball as well there.
But I think what really stands out about yesterday's game was just how Jaime Garcia pitched. Once Adam Wainwright went down back in April, people were really unsure about how he would perform. How the fifth spot, I should say, in that rotation would perform. They tried 3 different pitchers. First, Tim Cooney. He couldn't even last 3 innings. And then they had to put in, and this was during the time the bullpen was really being used a lot. He struggled. Then they brought in Tyler Lyons, who isn't really a bad pitcher, but he's a lot better as a reliever than he is a starter. And then finally, once he got healthy, they brought in the 28-year-old veteran, Jaime Garcia. And for all 3 of his starts, he has done very well. I mean,
that he's finally back from injury.
Yeah, especially that he's healthy. That's the key. He's in a much better position to be in that 5th spot. The race was really on between him and the young pitcher Marco Gonzalez, but much like Garcia, he's been injured lately, and Gonzalez has had his fair share of struggles. Now, currently, adding on that loss yesterday, Jaime is 1-2 with an ERA of 2.70, and like I said, him and Mike Fiers did pitch a very good duel last night. I mean, a 1-0 loss. Those are the type of baseball games people enjoy.
Yeah.
The blowouts just aren't as entertaining. Close-knit baseball is where it's at, honestly, for me. Now, what is your take on how Garcia's performed for the Cardinals since his return?
See, and I think a lot of people would say the opposite. I think a lot of people love the blood. They love the 10-9 games. They're big fans of offense, but it's always great to see a pitching duel. Garcia finally comes back from injury.
Right.
I'm holding my breath. I'm not sure he's going to actually stay healthy. It's to be determined down the road here. But nonetheless, it was a great start. Right now, you have Wainwright going down. One of the questions Jeff Blank said actually on Facebook was, what's the worst possible injury for the Cardinals to this date? I assume he's talking about whether it be Adam Wainwright, Matt Adams, or the like. So
I would still say Adam Wainwright. And when Adams went down, this whole season has been based off one philosophy for me: next man up. That's how it's been. The Cardinals are well known for having so much depth, not only in their minor league affiliates, ranging from Palm Beach all the way up to the top, but for just on their bench itself. And here comes Mark Reynolds stepping in. He's known for striking out quite a bit, and he had a couple strikeouts last night. But when he performs well, he really performs well. He's hit nearly 230 career home runs, and he's had 7 multi-hit games this season. But I still believe the worst injury that happened to the Cardinals was Adam Wainwright. Because while Garcia's filling in the spot well so far when he's healthy, you still miss that big presence Adam Wainwright has. He is like He's like a top quarterback on a football team. He's the field general. He leads the baseball players. He's just that presence he has. And for him to be in the dugout is just a big morale boost for the team themselves. So I would have to tell Jeff that the worst loss for the Cardinals is Adam Wainwright. But at the same time, the Cardinals have persevered and been able to move on from it.
And that's where you say Adam Wainwright being the top guy. I agree with that probably being the worst injury, because one thing I read is when you have Adam Wainwright as your number one guy, he's solidified in that position. Whereas now that he's down with an injury, the next guy has to step up. Well, Lance Lynn, Michael Wacha might necessarily have that experience in that number one starter role, and mentally there's a lot more there than it for Adam Wainwright, that he goes in the season, you're the number one starter, whereas midseason he goes down, someone has to step up. Well, you don't really know who that is. When you have Adam Wainwright as a number one guy, your 2, 3, and 4, and your 5 guys are all going to fall into place, and that's going to help out the bullpen.
Right.
They're going to all know their roles. So right now it's maybe no one really knows where they're at in the rotation and in the bullpen. No one knows really their roles, and that's fine, because you can figure that out come playoff time. As long as you have it figured out by playoff time, I mean, everybody, all the guys on the radio shows, have been saying is, we can complain. Well, we're still the best team in baseball, being the Cardinals at 33 and 18. So we have had some injuries. The Cardinals have had some injuries. But when you look at it, we're still in a good position to go out and win baseball games. Mark Reynolds at first base. Who do you think is in your opinion, what move do you think they're going to make that come deadline, if at all?
And that's the second part. I don't think they will. And Mozeliak, General Manager John Mozeliak, has stated that as of now they don't intend on making a trade. Now, a lot of people on social media, I've noticed, are saying make a trade for Ryan Howard of the Philadelphia Phillies. Ryan Howard, much like David Freese, is a St. Louisan. He's from here. But you'd be getting the same thing out of Reynolds as you would from Howard at the same price. Howard's getting older. He's older than Mark Reynolds is, and you don't want to have to spend as much money, because Reynolds does not have that big of a contract. You're getting a good player out of a cheap deal, and to get Howard in, it just would not work out. I mean, he strikes out a lot too, so it wouldn't necessarily even be an upgrade if you brought him in from the Phillies.
A lot of people are already tired of Mark Reynolds, saying that he strikes out too much. Well, when the fact of the matter is, he's still a 20 home run guy.
Exactly.
And with this team, I think a lot of people with the Cardinals, they always want somebody new, somebody different.
They always want something more.
You have all these players. You have a great young farm system. You have a plethora of outfielders, plethora of young stud pitchers, and it's always grasping for more. The best fans of baseball are greedy, in my opinion. They extremely greedy when it comes to these players, because you look at some of those teams out there, they don't have the luxury of having.
Take Stanton away from the Marlins. What do they have?
They only have Stanton. In my opinion, they overpaid for him, but that's a completely different story.
Right.
But when you look at it, credit John Mozeliak, credit Jeff Lonau, what he's doing down there with the Astros. These guys have scouted guys, have drafted players, have done a good job to go out at the trade deadline and being able to give away a couple guys to get a piece that they might need to head into the playoffs with the big surge. But at the end of the day, you already have a lot of players that are going to be great guys in this system and that are going to give you a great playoff run.
Right, and I agree with all the points on it. Now, as far as, speaking of pitching, actually, and this was something that you brought up to me earlier, is Carlos Martinez for real? Now, since you brought this up to me first, I want you to give your viewpoint on the matter.
Well, when it comes down to it, is the Cardinals invested in Carlos Martinez, and if he's for real or not is a moot point at this point, because they traded Shelby Miller away for Jason Hayward. I was making this argument. A lot of people right now in St. Louis are saying that, the Atlanta Braves won the Jason Hayward-Shelby Miller trade. Well, the fact of the matter is that Shelby Miller, if he was in St. Louis, would not be pitching a 1.2 ERA.
Right.
So they made a decision to get rid of him, to bring Hayward in, because they needed a right fielder to play that position. So the Cardinals made their choice already, that they wanted Carlos Martinez. These past 3 starts, we've seen him perform well, go deep into games, have a consistent pitching. Does that stick around for the whole season? That's a different story. We don't know that yet. You would like to hope so, but the fact of the matter is Carlos is still a very young player, still learning, probably needs to work on location is his biggest problem right now. We saw him fine-tune that the other night. That is in one start. can he do it consistently is now the biggest question. They invested in Carlos Martinez. He's shown that he can perform last season. He's shown that he can perform this season. Now, can he do it on a consistent basis to become one of those top of the line pitchers? Because Adam Wainwright's not going to be around for forever. Sorry to say to all those Cardinals fans out there, that love Adam Wainwright, love Yadier Molina. Those guys aren't going to be around forever.
No.
So when you look at these young guys, it's really they need to step up now, because in a couple of years,
the franchise will be depending on
exactly.
them.
Adam Wainwright could be one more injury away from his career being over.
Yeah.
So when it comes down to that, I think Carlos Martinez is doing his job right now, but he'll definitely need to continue to do that. And playoffs is a completely different question.
Yeah, and as for Carlos Martinez, honestly, I was at the game this past Sunday against the Dodgers, and I think it was his best start, if not at least in the top 3 that I have ever seen, and I think that the fans have ever seen. I mean, the 23-year-old just dominated the Dodgers in emotional fashion, as it was the anniversary of the debut of his late friend, Oscar Taveras, and you could just see, when Lance Lynn gets emotional, you just see him get pumped up like the Incredible Hulk. But then you see Carlos Martinez. He's poking his hands up to the sky. He's holding his heart. You could see the emotion. He threw 7 shutout innings, allowed 1 hit, and struck out 8. I mean, for a young 23-year-old, that's amazing. But like you said, can he keep that up on a consistent basis? Now, you don't, much as I'd like to see 7 shutout innings every start, you're not going to get that, and he hasn't given that. The key for the Cardinals pitching in general is quality starts, because they do have one of the best bullpens in baseball, let alone pitching staffs. But what happened earlier in the year, I would say between late April and mid-May, was that the bullpen was working its butt off way too much. I mean, they were used, you have bullpens that usually pitch about 3 to 4 innings. If you need to pitch more, there's something wrong with the starting pitcher. But what happened, like I said earlier about Tim Cooney starting, he gets out before the 3rd inning. The bullpen's pitching 90% of the game. And you need to have a more consistent plan, more consistent quality start feel in your starting rotation, or else there's going to be some serious issues. Now, going back to the entire Cardinals rotation, a lot of the losses have come, honestly, because of the bullpen once they've been out of the game. 3 of John Lackey's starts. John Lackey's ERA right now, he's got a 3-4 record. His ERA is 2.83, but he's had 3 losses, or I should say the Cardinals have lost 3 of the games after he's been taken out of the game. I mean, these guys have allowed 1 run or less, and the Cardinals' bullpen still blows the lead. And at the same time, you can't just blame all of that on the bullpen, and I'm not trying to place all the blame on that. I think the whole team, the hitting, like last night, they had plenty of opportunities, bases loaded, runners at the corners, 1 out, and they can't capitalize. So what needs to happen is, while they are the best team in baseball, a little more consistency would just put them on such a high top of the mountain that no other team would even attempt to climb. Nick, and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're listening to the post game on Arch City, brought to you by ArchCitySports.com. You can follow us at Arch City Sports on Twitter and on Facebook, at Nick Yale on Twitter, and at JCarpSportsFan1 on Twitter as well. And yeah, you look at the back end of this bullpen. Late inning games, the Cardinals start out hot. I don't think their offense is necessarily a problem. Their bullpen is struggling. We need to see a lot of these guys get into 7 innings, because when it comes down to it, Martinez is going to be on, and you can say it's probably the same thing for Waka, are going to be on a watch. Mike Matheny is going to be watching these 2 guys, kind of like what happened in Washington with Steven Strasburg. They're going to be limiting these guys because they're going to need them come playoff time.
Right.
So, especially with Wainwright being out. So, you talk about a little about the bullpen. Like I said earlier, I think once these guys know their roles, Trevor Rosenthal knows that he's the closer. He probably needs to develop a different pitch, in my opinion. But when it comes down to it, is these guys have to be playing offense, innings 1 through 9, not innings 1 through 5, and then hope that the bullpen can come in and save the day. You had a 1-0 game last night. Jason Hayward on second base. With that whole situation, you need to be getting those runners in. You have to be producing those getting those guys across the plate. You got guys in runners in scoring position, and you have to be capitalizing on that. There's been a lot of bad base running right now by the Cardinals.
That's been unbelievable.
Mike Matheny has been criticized for being too aggressive on the base pass. I'm fine with Mike Matheny being aggressive on the base pass.
Yeah.
The other night you have Randall Grichuk standing on first base. You have a flyout, Johnny Peralta standing on second, and he ran all the way to the bag because he couldn't find out where the ball is. In that situation, if it's going to be a home run, run halfway. If it's going to be a double, run halfway. You can still make the third. And if it's going to be a fly out, then you drop back to first. There's no reason that you should be running all the way to second base, and that's just a mental error Randall Grichuk made. You saw the same thing with Colton Wong in the playoffs, a couple years ago, being picked off at first base.
Picked off at first. I was just watching that a couple of days ago, and I'm still mesmerized at how badly that whole
And it's young guys, I think the pressure's on when it all comes back to
it's that young adrenaline, really.
Yeah, the young adrenaline's there, You're trying to contribute for your team. You want to keep your pitchers in it, especially in those 1-0 games. But when it comes down to it, you got to have smarter base running and be more alert, because when there's 44,000 fans going crazy and Jose Oquendo's yelling at you from the third baseline, you can't hear him. Well, you got to be more alert than that. But that's something that you work out. We're only 50 or so games into the season.
About 50.
As long as you figure it out by the playoffs and make it into the playoffs, this will be forgotten about, because if you're making the playoffs, the fact of the matter is in that September, that's when it matters most. And the mental errors now, it's why you have a 162-game season, because you can figure that stuff out.
And I think even better about it, instead of it being legitimately forgotten about, they'll still remember it, but they'll look back and say, wow, look at the progression. Look at how much they've improved. Their mental toughness, their mental awareness of what's going on in the field and on the base paths has either progressed or regressed. It depends. And we hope, for the sake of our team, that it progresses. But I think, honestly, there was one, you remember a few games ago with Jason Hayward at third base on the fly out to left field that he could have scored on. And he runs halfway, but then he comes back, and it costs the Cardinals a run.
You got to be tagging up there. You can't be, in that situation, you don't run halfway, you just tag up and
he's fast. He's probably the second fastest next is Peter Borges, and he could
I would say Colton Wong.
Or Wong, too.
Borges, Grichuk, still pretty fast.
Yeah.
They're all up there, though.
They're all up there. That's the thing. We got a very speed-oriented team. Like, we got a very balanced blend of power in the team when you have, like, Adams and you have Holiday and Peralta. But then you got fast guys like Grichuk, Wong, and then Hayward and Borges. It's
and that's
amazing.
how you have to play. You almost have to play the Whitey Herzog small ball, because they don't have a lot of that.
Whitey ball proved how successful speed can be. You don't need to have an entire team invested on just power
I think it's
hitters.
just using it in the right way, and Matheny's trying to be aggressive because he understands that the Cardinals have the speed on the base pass to use, and they don't have that power. They don't have much of that power. They have Hayward, they have Peralta, Adams is out, they have Holiday. They don't have a very powerful lineup up and down. They do have power hitters, but they're more of a fundamental get on, move the runners over kind of team. So as long as they can stick by their motto and maybe channel their speed and try to figure it out, be smarter on the base pass, they could definitely be winning more games than they already are. But I'm not complaining.
No.
They're 33-18. There's nothing.
They're doing something right if they're
exactly
top. I mean, people really like to nitpick. I mean, it's not like the team was gonna be 53-0 or something. Just imagine how far a team could go undefeated in baseball history. They're in a very great position. And over an actually, believe it or not, record-wise aside, the NL Central is a very tough division.
It is.
The Reds have been struggling lately, but believe it or not, the Cubs and the Pirates are still there, and anything can happen.
I think that's what it's going to come down to those three teams.
Oh yeah, and I think something's going to kick in, with Chris Bryant and the Cubs and McCutchen and everybody, Alvarez on the Pirates. It will come down, but for the Cardinals to at least get this start and show they're not messing around is what you need to be successful.
Exactly.
Now, when we were talking about, I'm sorry to cut you off there, we were talking earlier about Jason Hayward. A lot of this nitpicking that we've been talking about comes down to him himself.
Yeah.
And I just want you to know, like you were mentioning earlier about how people are already saying, oh, Shelby Miller, that trade was bad. The Braves are getting the good end of it. I mean, what do you think about how Jason Hayward has performed so far this season?
Well, he's in a new environment. I think part of it comes with a little bit. You have to take it with a grain of salt. He's got to learn how to work with this new team. There's always going to be a little bit of a rough patch. I feel like for any player trying to hit and play in a new, different environment. His defense was shaky early on. I think that's kind of been a little bit of he's been able to fix that here in St. Louis and really work on that because that's what he prides himself on is good defense. But when it comes down to it, I mean, I think it's still too early to tell who wins this trade. People are saying in Atlanta, Atlanta wins this trade. Shelby Miller almost threw a no-hitter. Because Jason Heyward is not hitting to his potential, hitting 25 home runs, 300, like everybody expects him to do. Well, that's what all the fans here in St. Louis want. They want him to come in and hit right away and hit 300, hit 25 home runs, and make it sound like the Cardinals won this trade and that we gave up Shelby Miller and that we win. That the Cardinals got this right. But he is on the end of his contract, and I think that also has some fans nervous because is John Mozeliak going to re-sign him? There's still a lot of good young outfielders in the Cardinals system with Stephen Piscotty not even up in the majors yet.
No. And he won't be up for a while.
Yeah, and I think he gets his chance in September, but Jason Heyward definitely needs to prove to himself that he can perform because if he doesn't, then he might not be around next year if he does want as much money as he says he does, or as his agent says he does, I should say, because he's due for a payday. Does he take a cut to stay in St. Louis? These are all questions that we don't really have the answers to.
No,
we'll
you don't.
see down the road, but right now I think he's performing fine.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about players that are having a slow start, people are complaining about Heyward having a slow start. Honestly, Yadier Molina's having a slow start at the plate.
Hasn't hit a home run.
Exactly, hasn't hit a home run. Still only has about 19 RBIs. I mean, Reynolds is only a few behind him, and he hasn't even played as much this season. So the thing about Heyward, you've seen he's a big presence in the outfield. I mean, yes, he's had some bad judgment plays, like the one ball that blooped right through between his arm and that went basically to the wall. Yeah, that one was a big, big mistake on his part. No one's denying that. But you see what kind of presence he has. Another reason, I think, personally, that he has struggled or at least, like you said, not met his full potential yet, is just because of the constant lineup shifts he's been dealing with. He's been in the second spot in the order. Then he's been moved down to 7th and 8th and 6th. He's been all around the lineup. They're trying to find a good spot to have him while keeping him in the lineup. And once the Cardinals really find that balance and really, because putting Carpenter in the 2 spot's been the best thing, honestly, this season. But once they find a spot for Heyward, because they know how good he can be, once they find a consistent spot for him to be in, then I think he'll start getting some more hits, RBIs, etc.
And I think Mike Matheny's still trying to figure out how to work the lineup card. You see every day. You see on our comments board every day people criticizing Mike Matheny. This isn't the lineup that's going to win it. He's an idiot. And then they'll go out and win 8-2.
Yeah.
So I mean, and
then they'll cheer saying how I loved this lineup the whole time.
And I think he's still trying to figure out. He has to fill in Tony and step into Tony La Russa's shoes. I think he's trying to do use some of that. And try to please the fans at the same time. But it's hard when you have 4 or 5 outfielders that could play every day. You have John Jay, Randall Grichuk, Peter Bourjos, Matt Holliday, and Jason Heyward. Any one of those guys could probably be a everyday player, and trying to work those guys into the lineup to see where they fit best against which pitcher. It's a hard job. Mike has a hard job out there to
being a manager's never easy.
Yeah, no, and trying to make the right decisions in the bullpen that's struggling right now. In late game situations, people also say he overuses the bullpen, which I would agree with that. He does use a lot of pitchers to get the job done, and I think he just needs to trust his guys, trust Seth Maness. You give up a home run, hey, go back in there and get the next batter. You need to trust some of these guys to stay in there longer to do their job, because if you can't instill that confidence in those guys, then they're never going to perform down the road. That's exactly it.
And one last thing regarding the Cardinals, we were talking, a lot about Heyward and how he's performing for the Cardinals. But let's take a quick look at how 3 other players from the Cardinals, not necessarily all on the Braves now, but how they're performing with the other teams they're on now. And those 3 players I want to bring up are Shelby Miller, but then there's 2 others that are actually, it's been interesting how they've been performing this year. Joe Kelly of the Boston Red Sox and another Red Sox, and it's unfortunate how he's been struggling, Alan Craig. And I'd say we start with Shelby Miller. He's 5-2. Like we said, he was 1 out away from a no-hitter. He has a 1.48 ERA, actually, that it did get bumped up, and he has 49 strikeouts. But like you said, it's not guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed in anything in life, let alone in baseball, that he would have that same record, that same performance, if he was with the Cardinals. But at the same time, it's nice to see that he's found a place where he really can perform at that level that made him such a hot prospect in the minor leagues, actually.
Yeah, and I think with the Cardinals, what was happening there is, they were so tentative that he was the young pitcher that's going to be the next Adam Wainwright, be the next Chris Carpenter for the St. Louis Cardinals, that they were tentative to throw him out there and not let him get lit up. And they didn't play him in the playoffs at all. So in his mind, we don't know what he's thinking, but in his mind, he has the capability to be a starting pitcher. And the Cardinals selected Carlos Martinez over Shelby Miller. That's just the fact of the matter. So you can say a change of scenery helped them, didn't help them. Some people believe in that. I think a change of scenery certainly helps players. You look at Jason Hayward and Shelby Miller, both in their old cities, now in new cities. I think a change of scenery was good for both of those players. Would Shelby Miller be pitching and have a 1.43 ERA, 1.48 ERA, pitching for the St. Louis Cardinals? No, because he wouldn't be a starting pitcher. Right now, there's not a scenario coming into the 2015 season where Carlos Martinez and Shelby Miller both would be in the starting rotation.
No way.
Unless they decided to move on from John Lackey, and they didn't because of his contract being
right. And plus, he's just a big veteran presence.
Yeah. I mean, he's an innings eater. He's a Lance Lynn, how Lance Lynn was a few years ago before we made him, our number 3 pitcher.
He gives the quality starts that we want and people and the Cardinals themselves need out of all the other pitchers.
He's going to be an innings eater. John Lackey's going to be an innings eater. Exactly. Whereas if you have, let's take a chance on Carlos Martinez and Shelby Miller, maybe they pitch really well, maybe they don't. They're not to that point in their careers.
You know what you get out of Lackey.
Exactly. You don't know what you're going to get out of Martinez and Miller every outing. They might have better potential, but the fact of the matter is they chose Carlos Martinez over Shelby Miller. Shelby Miller's pitching great in Atlanta, but we also don't know if that's going to last the whole season.
Exactly.
Come end of 2015 season, then show me Shelby Miller. If he has, 20 wins, great. That's great for the Atlanta Braves. If Jason Hayward's not hitting up to his potential, you win
great
some.
For the Braves still.
You win some, you lose some. I mean, the St. Louis Cardinals traded David Freese and got Randall Grichuk and Peter Borges out of that.
Yeah.
And look how that's working out.
Right.
So, I mean, that's the fact.
And while Shelby Miller is firmly entrenched in the rotation in Atlanta, you have Joe Kelly with Boston, who honestly, he just pitched 5 innings in his last start, which was a 4-3 loss in Arlington against the Rangers. But he's fighting for... we got rid of Joe Kelly. He's fighting just to stay in the rotation, fighting for a 5th spot, let alone trying to actually be entrenched in that rotation spot.
With Joe, I think it's you see when they traded him away, they traded away Joe Kelly, traded away Alan Craig. At that point, the Cardinals, in the year for the Cardinals last year, they just had too many pitchers. Somebody had
overload.
They just needed need to free up some spots. They needed to make a move to get a pitcher, and they trade Craig and Kelly, 2 fan favorites. Someone was saying on the radio show this morning, get over the fan favorites. Get over the fact that they're fan favorites.
It's a business.
Yeah, it's a business. And whatever best move for the organization, that's the move that is going to be made. And I was not pleased a few years back in 2011 when Mozeliak went out and got, Edwin Jackson and Zeb Chinsky. I was like, what are you doing? How does that help the Cardinals coming into the playoffs? It's a deadline move. And turns out that Zeb Chinsky was one of the most important people in that 2011 series, getting the likes of Ryan Howard and Prince Fielder. So I told myself I'll never question a move Mo makes ever again, because he's a great general manager. He knows what he's doing. It's why he's a general manager and we're not. Everybody's going to say, John Mozeliak made a dumb move trading so-and-so away, and why do we have this no-name player, no-name left-hander out of the bullpen, what have you. But come at the end of the day, Mo knows what he's doing. He's going to do what's best for the team, and that's why the Cardinals are such a great organization, because of the front office and the kind of management that they have.
And then the last player we have is Alan Craig, and this one is a lot more sad to hear about what's been going on with him. As far as, I don't think it's like a personal life issue. It's just him struggling at the plate.
Yeah, looking at Alan Craig is he was injured when they traded him away. He had the ankle injury, the sore ankle, and I think Mozeliak knows what he's going to be getting out of guys. Like I said before, the Cardinals had a plethora of outfielders, had a plethora of options at each position. So I think when they trade away Alan Craig, well, he's a little bit injured right now, a little bit banged up. You saw the same thing with David Freese, an ankle, a kind of an injury that you're never really going to get over. So it's unfortunate that Alan Craig is struggling. He was one of my more favorite players in St. Louis, and he could be used at that he could be used as that option as a backup first baseman. And people are saying now, get Alan Craig back, bring him back to be in that first base behind Mark Reynolds. No, that's not going to happen. They're not going to do that. Mark Reynolds is fine as what Mark Reynolds is doing right now. And like you were saying earlier, I don't really think they need a first baseman right now for the long term being here with Matt Adams out. So it's unfortunate to see Alan Craig struggling, but he's not coming back to the Cardinals.
No, and he's even had stints in the minor leagues, because there were times his batting average ranged from in the 150s to 143. I mean, things like that, you're not coming back into the major leagues for a while, let alone the Cardinals.
Yeah, no, not at all. All right, this has been ArchD Sports. This is a post game. We'll be right back, talking a little Blues, Rams, and Mizzou action. So stay tuned. Cool. Boom, boom. Ready to rumble?
Yeah, you kick us off.
All right. Welcome back to the post game. Brought to you. Screw that up. Welcome back to the post game, brought to you by ArchCitySports.com. I'm Nick Yale, along with Jeremy Karp. This is the debut installment.
Yes, it is.
Talked a little St. Louis Cardinals on the last.
Good amount of it, actually.
Very good amount for about half an hour. Talking about St. Louis Cardinals rotation, the lineup, everything from top to bottom, because we know the followers love to talk about the Cardinals. As always, you can follow us at Arch Sports on Twitter, at Nick Yale on Twitter, and at JCarpSportsFan1 on Twitter, or follow us on Facebook, or follow us and like us on Facebook. That's just Arch City Sports. If you guys have any questions or comments, tweet at us, comment on Facebook, and we will answer some on the podcast. But now we're going to move on to a little Blues talk.
Oh, yeah. This may hurt, but we got a lot to talk about. Now, the first thing we have to talk about is the fact that, yes, for those that may not like it, but it's happening, Ken Hitchcock, the Blues coach, is coming back for a one-year deal with the St. Louis Blues. Now, Nick, what do you think about them re-signing Hitchcock?
I think it's the right move. Mike Babcock, whether they talked to him, did not talk to him, you don't know. But the fact of the matter is that he's going. Is he Toronto? Is that where he's headed out to?
Yeah, he's
Toronto.
heading out
Toronto
to
Maple
Toronto.
Leafs. Be the next head coach there. So I think bringing Hitchcock back was a smart move. When you look at the coaching situation throughout St. Louis, throughout the years, the biggest point was made is that some of the winningest coaches have all coached here and won Stanley Cups. Joe Quenneville, Scotty Bowman. They've all coached in St. Louis, not won a cup, and then gone on and coached elsewhere and ended up winning a Stanley Cup. So when you look at the coaching has something to do with it, but ultimately I think it's a lot of the players that need to go or stay. Something's got to happen. There's got to be a shakeup up the top. Head coach or general manager Doug Armstrong said that earlier this week. There would be a shakeup of the core players, so that's to be determined. What are your thoughts on the old Hitchcock coming back?
Well, I like him coming back, and I'm glad it's a one-year deal. They weren't going to extend him past 1 year. This is in the situation where it's really starting to become, and I feel the same way about Jeff Fisher and the Rams, but we'll get to that later. But for these two coaches, it's playoffs or bust. And not just playoffs, getting further.
In the playoffs. Get out of the past first round.
Getting the talent. This team has so much talent and utilizing it to the fullest. I mean, in 281 games since he's been head coach, the Blues are 175, 89, and 27. That's a 671 point percentage. But The problem isn't the regular season; it's the playoffs. They're 10-17 in the playoffs. For the past 3 years, they've been out in the first round. Then they were out in the second round the other year. I mean, and they've 2 out of the last 4 years they won a Central Division title. It's unreal how bad this team performs in the playoffs when in the regular season they honestly look like the best team in all of hockey.
I mean, it all starts with goaltending when you look at it. And for the Blues, the biggest problem is that they don't commit to a single goaltender all year long. And come playoff time, it's a platoon of goalies going in, and that's one of the biggest rules in hockey is you don't mess with the goalie's head. You looked at it before with when they had Brian Elliott and Yaroslav Halak and bouncing them back and forth, and they actually platooned those two guys in the playoffs. This was the first year where they actually committed to doing just one goalie, it being Jake Allen. Right. Did that a little bit last year with Ryan Miller. That never ended up working out. But until the Blues commit to a single goaltender, you look at L.A. with Jonathan Quick. You look at Chicago with Corey Crawford. Scott Darling did play a little bit there for Chicago at the beginning.
And even Henrik Lundqvist for New York.
And Henrik Lundqvist for New York. You got to go with pick a goaltender, and you have to stick with them. And I think for the Blues right now, it is sticking with Jake Allen. That's their guy. They've have a number of goaltenders come through St. Louis, including Ben Bishop, the Tampa Bay Lightning goaltender that's starting in the playoffs. And will be starting in the Stanley Cup for Tampa Bay. But they've had all these goaltenders come through St. Louis, but they've never had a solidified number one in a long time. And so if Jake Allen truly is their guy that they're committing to, they got to stick with them. Sign him, give him a long-term deal here coming up, and then, ride him out, whether through the thick and the thin, throughout the regular season in the playoffs. It's always good to have a backup goaltender in case something does implode, injuries happen. But when it comes down to it, the Blues have to stick with one goaltender so that they can really make a deep playoff run, and that's where it all starts. You can talk about getting rid of these core players, but it all starts with goalie.
But the question is, say they extend Jake Allen. Now, does that just regulate Brian Elliott to a backup goal, or what are they would they use him as bait to get any other players?
He's gone. In my opinion, he's out.
Just flat out?
I'm not sure what his contract terms are coming up here, but Brian Elliott is a starting goaltender, and he has the potential to be starting somewhere else. He can start in a different city, and I think if the Blues say, hey, they want Jake Allen, then Brian Elliott deserves a different location, deserves a change of location. He's been the backup to the backup. When Marty Brodeur was here, they brought in Marty Brodeur and had him here, and that didn't really do great for.
It wasn't terrible, but it just
basically
it was a great presence, and he's still working within the Blues organization. But it wasn't the big great move we were all hoping.
Basically, you're saying once Jake Allen was injured, is saying okay, instead of starting Brian Elliott, we're going to go out and get Marty Brodeur. What does that say to Brian Elliott? That doesn't. It says that they've already passed on him.
And it's like Brodeur is the great. I mean, you can consider him the great. Mark Brodeur,
he's
the great.
Old, though.
But that's what I'm saying. I mean that, and even if you're being replaced by honestly a legend,
coming out of retirement, he's rusty. Why would you? What does that say to?
So
Brian
that hurts
Elliott?
your morale as a player, honestly, and even as a person, let alone just being in the sport. And so that's why I do agree with the sense that how Brian Elliott would have really mixed, if not negative, feelings towards that type of move.
Now, what do you think about the? Talk a little about the goalies here. In your opinion, who has to go when it comes to core players for the Blues? Obviously, I think everybody's under the consensus that Patrick Berglund is going to be out.
Yeah, I don't see
Brian
Berglund
Jackman leaving. But when it comes to TJ Oshie's, David Backes, who do you think's leaving?
A lot of people are talking. I've talked to a lot of people, and I'm starting to share the same sentiments. And I might get a lot of hate for it, but honestly, it really is a toss-up. Because both have that feeling, but like we were saying during the Cardinals segment, this is not a fan favorites thing. Oshie was a hero in the Olympics, but despite his good, important goal in Game 6 in the playoffs this past season, him, like the rest of the Blues, were very silent during the playoffs against the Wild.
Backes did not contribute up to what he should have been in a captain's role. Outside of Vladdy Tarasenko, none of these guys made a contribution like they should have. You see a team like the Blackhawks who have Kane, Sharp, Taves, all these guys that are all contributing, and you hate to make the comparison to the Blackhawks, but that's the standard of this league. Chicago is one of the top teams, if not the best team in the NHL year after year. You look at the Ducks who have Perry and Getzlaf, guys like this. The Blues don't have that guy that can, with the exception of Vladdy Tarasenko, to go out and perform. And Vladdy can't do all himself.
No,
you can't expect that from him.
When you were saying about Getzlaf and Perry for the Ducks, a lot of these teams have 1-2 punches, but the problem is the Blues only have a 1 punch.
They have Jaden Schwartz, who is probably the next best thing to Vladimir Tarasenko. But they're young guys. Yeah. Right now, they need these veterans, these guys that have been around for a couple of years, the guys they've built their team around, the TJ Oshie's and the David Backes. Those are the guys that need to step up. And now that they haven't, in my opinion, you clean house. You get rid of Oshie, you get rid of Backes, because as someone was saying on the morning show over and my friends over at CBS 920 is they were saying that a lot of these guys coming out don't really have. Coming out of this after the end of the season, Blues aren't on a high note right now. These guys' trade value is not very high, so you're not going to get much for them. But new faces have to come in. You have to restart, rebuild something, because this is the Blues team that should have done it. Should have made a deep run
this
in the playoffs.
Year, if any.
Of any, right? It's like you have the great coach, you have the great young players, you have the fans are there. Like the formula added up should result in deep playoff run / Stanley Cup. You can say whatever the curse is, whatever you believe about the Blues not making a deep playoff run, but the fact of the matter is, if it's not working out,
I don't even think it's a curse. I just think it's pitiful. I mean, and then there's those really, really loyal Blues fans that start to get mad at the impatient loyal Blues fans. But why shouldn't they be impatient when you have teams that literally can make a Stanley Cup run and even win it? And then all of a sudden, boom, first round, you're out. I mean, what do you expect?
You have one of the best records
Why shouldn't they be mad? I mean,
They have one of the best records in the NHL all year long. And it's been year after year now. Oh, this is the year for the Blues. Oh, this is the year.
And look what the Blackhawks did to the Wild. I mean, it's unbelievable.
I think it almost hurts more than, that they make it that far. They make it to the playoffs every year and then lose. It'd be different if they just sucked, if they just weren't good at all.
Right.
If they just if they were like a Buffalo.
If they had a fluke season and then they made it.
Yeah, and like a Houston Astros. You lose every year and now you're starting to get good. Well, the Blues have been a good team year after year after year. These past 3, 4, 5 years, they've had the system, they've had the players, and they just can't make the deep run. It's like, how do you get over that hump? Is it a mindset thing? Is it a coaching thing? We don't know. So they bring Hitchcock back. They give him the 1-year deal, bring in some new guys. We'll see what happens. I mean, it's been the talk of the town of late, with the exception of the Cardinals season here. But this is the next hottest topic is what's next for the Blues.
Oh yeah, and what's unfortunate is over the past 2 years, the Blues have won 103 games. That's at the top of the league. 103 games in 2 years, and they can't get past the first round. Now, we talk about which players may leave, which players may go. And honestly, I think Oshie and Backes, they both are on. There's not one. To me, it's not like, Oshie's going to go, no doubt, or Backes is going to go, no doubt. I think they both
both go.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think they have an equal chance of leaving. I mean, there's not one that has a lead over the other. But here's the question. Say the Blues, depending on how this upcoming season goes, if it ends the same as the past few seasons have, what do you think happens to Doug Armstrong?
I mean, that's something that the front office has to look at is depending on how this next season goes. I say if this next season goes
the way the past few,
I think he's gone.
Because at least Hitchcock would be gone.
Yeah. Hitch would obviously be gone anyway after the end of this year, unless they do make a deep playoff run or something does change. But he's the one making the roster moves, making the decisions on players to get. So I think a lot is riding on what players he gets rid of and what new players he brings in. Because anything less than a deep playoff run, can he stay? Is it right that he stays another
how
year?
He's on not really.
It's
how
like
he's on a leash, but not as long as the one everyone else is.
Yeah, it's like he's done a great job, brought in great players, and essentially he's done his job by bringing in the players and the coaches by the formula that was set in place this year. They should have made a deep playoff run.
Yeah.
It's the fact they were one of the best teams all season long and then just laid an egg in the playoffs, which seems like.
And that's not to take away from the Wild's talent. But just that the Blues are at the top of the league. This
Yeah,
is a team that could hoist the Stanley Cup.
I don't really
but
think.
didn't.
I don't really think because you can blame Doug Armstrong because in my opinion he's doing his job.
Right.
But yeah, so
It's still a business.
I think that there's a lot riding on what happens for the season. That should be a determined down
But the
line.
bottom line is that Hitchcock's back, and his seat is hotter than ever for the St. Louis Blues. And honestly, the fans' patience is higher than ever. They're really starting to lose it. So we'll see what happens.
That's it. Nick Yale, Jeremy Karp talking post game, talking Blues on the post game. Brought to you by ArchCitySports.com. You can follow us on Twitter at ArchCitySports or like us on Facebook at ArchCitySports. Coming up, we're going to be talking Rams as well as Mizzou football. What's in store for the Tigers coming up next season? Back-to-back SEC championships. Can Gary Pinkel repeat? We'll be right back.
Yeah.
All right, talking. Welcome. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back to the post game. Brought to you by ArchDSports.com. Nick Yale and Jeremy Karp talking little Cardinals, little Blues. We're going to jump into the Rams now. Jeremy, what are your thoughts on the draft pick some of the Rams got?
Well, the entire NFL draft, I was basically telling myself if the Rams did not draft an offensive lineman, at least one, then the whole draft, it doesn't matter who else they got, the draft would be a bust. And then they go out and draft multiple linemen and really upgraded what was arguably the weakest position of the year. And obviously everyone's going to talk about how weak the quarterback position was last year. But look at the past few years. We have not had a consistent offensive line in practically a decade. It's just been battered, beaten, and bruised linemen that lead to battered, beaten, and bruised quarterbacks. And running backs, for that matter. Now, the pick that actually was very interesting for me was the very first pick the Rams got.
Yep.
The running back, Todd Gurley. I'll admit, and I'm sure you might agree, we did not see that pick coming.
Not at all.
It just came out of nowhere. But the interesting thing is, especially, you had Trey Mason who had such a good year last year.
My thinking is 100%. I don't remember who I was talking about this before the draft started. A couple of my buddies, they're asking me who's because I got out to Mizzou, so nobody else is really from St. Louis, and they're saying who the Rams going to take. And I was like, there's a 100% chance that they're not going to take a running back. There's no way to take a running back. And all of a sudden, here's Adam Schefter tweeting like, here comes a surprise from the Rams camp, and they take Todd Gurley. My initial thought is, what the hell are you doing? Why would you decide to take Todd Gurley when you have Trey Mason?
I thought it was all Trey.
You have a 1-2 punch right there. That's good enough. Pick. Take your wide receiver, take an offensive lineman, somebody. Well, looking back at it is now that I look back at it, I'm like, that actually was a pretty solid pick because at that spot, their wide receiver was not there. Amari Cooper wasn't there, and Kevin White wasn't there. So neither of those guys were there. And then Brandon Scherf out of Iowa, the big offensive tackle, was also high on their draft board. He wasn't there. So what do? You take the next best pick instead of taking a chance on one of the number 2 wide receivers.
Because all these offensive linemen were not top on the board.
No.
It was a big jump between Scherf and then the next.
Well, I thought that's what they're going to do. They're going to end up trading Gurley to a different team. But looking back at a lot of teams nowadays are doing a 2 running back system, kind of what the New York Giants and the New Orleans Saints
and the Browns with
implemented.
Terrence West and Isaiah Crowell.
The Giants and the Saints were the first to do it a couple of years ago to do two running back systems. You saw it in New Orleans with Darren Sproles, Mark Ingram, and Reggie Bush back in the day. And same thing in New York. And now a lot more teams are kind of doing this 2 running back system, 1 speedster, 1 ground and pound guy. And Gurley and Mason are kind of a mix of both. They're not. I would say Gurley's
more the power.
He's the heavier set. Mason is a smaller speedster, but Gurley still has pretty decent speed.
Yeah.
And so with that sense, you're going to take a chance. They're taking a chance on Gurley. It's a high reward, high risk, high reward kind of player because he's either going to bust a knee again or
that's why I was going to ask you what health issues.
Well, yeah. Looking at the health issues, I think Jeff Fisher. Less knee. They're taking a chance, but people are comparing him to Adrian Peterson. Now I don't know what how that's going to pan out. But I like the comparison. I watched him play at Missouri. He absolutely tore Missouri apart, destroyed, dominated. His last year in the SEC, his last 2 years in the SEC, he was an incredible running back. And so if he can translate that to the NFL is 100 times different than colleges, but I like Gurley. I'm leaning more towards enjoying the pick than completely hating it. To be
Yeah,
honest.
and I remember my friends and I after the draft, we had a big old conversation about what we thought about it. There were some that liked it, there were some that didn't like it, and then there were some that were just absolutely in shock about it.
Tim Kaiser's back here, also of Archie Sports, dropping water bottles.
Whoops.
But yeah, I like the pick. I mean, what are your thoughts on some of the lower picks? Last year they got EJ Gaines, also out of Missouri. Missouri
That was
Pride.
honestly, that was probably one of my.
Love EJ Gaines, 6th round.
I'm not trying to suck up
cornerback.
to Mizzou, just to let you know, but honestly, he was one of,
You
if
can
not my
suck up to
favorite.
Mizzou all you want. Missouri is.
I'm not going to.
The University of Missouri. Shout out to my boys out there. Great school, great university.
If only my St. Charles Community College had a football program, but
You think they could compete with Tigers?
no.
GPs, Gary Pinkel squad, Matty Mock. I don't know. We'll get to that down the road. Talking about Missouri Tigers here a little bit.
Yeah, but EJ Gaines last year was honestly one of my favorite picks of last year's draft. This year I did like Havenstein, Rob Havenstein, an offensive lineman, but some of the lower picks,
Yeah,
I mean, there were some good ones. I mean, it wasn't a terrible draft by any means. It was actually one of the best Durants have had in a while. They upgraded the offensive line like they needed to. That was the key. That was the key coming into
you
this
mentioned
draft.
Havenstein, and he's in. When you look at a guy, I'm completely blanking on who they drafted last year as in their first round pick.
Robinson?
Greg Robinson. Thank you, Greg Robinson out of Auburn. Completely blanking there. But when you look at these offensive tackles, what the Rams need is a plug-and-play player. A little bit of tongue twister there. And so when you look at Greg Robinson, he wasn't necessarily – he was a project. He's a development. They've been moving him around. And Scherf was probably the only offensive tackle in this draft that's a plug-and-play right-away kind of guy, and that's the kind of guy the Rams need. So Havenstein is big, got great hands, apparently, is what the scouts have been saying.
He's very agile, able to move around and keep the linemen off.
But with offensive tackles, the thing is it's a completely different system when you're playing against a defensive line in the NFL, like the Rams or the Jets, also a great defensive line, than it is in playing college. So a lot of these guys are more of projects. So I'm never completely sold on an offensive tackle until they actually go out there and perform.
And for me, it's not even like after, I agree with that about not right away selling on a player. But it's not even that after year one. I want to see for a while how they consistently perform. Because Roger Saffold, he has his good games, and then he has his bad games, and then he's hurt so badly.
There's not been a year that has gone by where Roger Saffold has not been injured. It might be like second preseason game. If he makes it through the preseason, first week in St. Louis, player down,
Exactly.
Second quarter, it's gotta be Roger Saffold out there, and it turns out it is. He's a little injury prone, but they got to bring him back on a pretty good deal after he failed his physical out there in Oakland. So they did get Saffold back, lose Jake Long along the offensive line. So.
And Long himself was actually he was a good line, but at the same time he was injury prone as well, and that is why I'm very glad the Rams had a successful draft, because that's what they needed to do. They needed offensive line upgrades, or else this season, no matter who else you drafted, who else you brought in, it was going to be a tough time in what's arguably the toughest division in the National Football League.
And that's just it, because at this point in time, what the Rams need is guys along the offensive line that can come up and can perform and be, run blockers and be, protection for the quarterback, because Sam Bradford, obviously with his injuries, with his banged up knees, they got Nick Foles now. I'm more sold on Nick Foles than I was on Sam Bradford. The biggest question is going to be, who's he going to be throwing to? You look at some of the wide receivers out there, for the Rams.
Well, they got Kenny Britt, but the issue
is Kenny Britt a number one wide receiver, though?
No, but the thing of it is,
the Rams don't have a number one wide receiver.
No, they got, in my opinion, there's a bunch of number twos, not necessarily.
Or threes, or fours. I mean, Brian Quick was a great wide receiver.
Brian Quick can really stand out.
It took him 3 years to finally figure out how to run a route and how to catch a football, but he finally did it. And now they're changing offensive coordinators. That's the biggest thing, is because for a lot of these guys, it's the change of offensive coordinator means a whole new system that they have to learn. And for guys like Brian Quick and Chris Givens, who took 3 years to finally, once they finally figured it out, they performed. But when it comes at the end of the day, the Rams need a better wide receiver than they got. Kenny Britt is not.
Well, I'm not saying he's not a number one receiver.
Yeah.
I'm saying what the Rams, obviously the Rams don't have that standout wide receiver.
They don't have any standout wide receivers.
Yeah, they don't have a standout wide receiver that is like the go-to guy, like Odell Beckham Jr. They don't have the really guy that everybody wants to cover. Everybody's got a man.
I was hoping so badly that they got could figure out somehow to get Kevin White or Amari Cooper because.
But see, that was smart on the Raiders' part because Derek Carr is a good young quarterback, and Amari Cooper it'll be a big role for him.
It'll work.
But then, like I'm saying, you got good receivers. You got Austin, you got Bailey, you got Givens, Quick, Britt. But now you really got to either make one of them stand out, make it to where one of them can stand out, or find a way to get, because you don't want an overabundance of receivers. If you have too many receivers, then you're really in a really bad situation because then you're teaching too many receivers. Like you said, with all the changing offensive coordinators.
You can't give them enough snaps. You can't give you can't give a guy like Chris Givens as many snaps every single game if you want Brian Quick and Tavon Austin and Stedman Bailey who are starting to step up. Guys that have performed in camp and performed in practice. You can't give a guy like Chris Givens the same amount of snaps. And Chris Givens and Brian Quick are both in contract years. If they don't perform, in my opinion, they're out. You can't keep them around.
I see at least Quick having a good season the sense that they.
But if he doesn't, does he stay?
It's hard to tell
because Brian Quick's been around for 3 or 4 years now. Finally, last year he started performing. Yeah, he was great before he got injured, but gets injured or doesn't get injured. If he doesn't perform, how can you keep him? You have to move on to somebody else.
But you also got to look into how the other receivers perform. I mean, obviously Givens and Quick.
I would let Stedman Bailey ride out his rookie contract, and cut Brian Quick, rather than keep Brian Quick around if he does not have a good year coming up.
Okay, now. It's not just the offensive side of the ball that's big on the Rams. And if anything, you have their specialty, and that's the defensive side of the ball. It's arguably their best side of the ball.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, and they arguably have the best defensive line in the entire NFL. And first, for those that don't know, Chris Long and William Hayes, defensive ends, recently did a thing down in St. Louis it's a wonderful story, and you all should check it out Chris Long's tweeted it.
On ESPN.
And it's on ESPN, and it's garnered a lot of national publicity. They both, for 24 hours in St. Louis, tried to raise awareness. I apologize. Tried to raise awareness for being homeless by taking to the streets and being homeless themselves. And like we both said, it's a very touching story. And whenever you get the chance, they both have very big hearts. And shout out to them for that wonderful gesture they both did. But now about the defensive line on the field, not just off it. I mean, what do you think about the depth that this team has on the defensive line?
That's their strength. That's what they're going to be riding. It's what they've been their strength this past 5 or so years, ever since he's got these guys. They have 5 guys that are number 1 pick. And Nick Fairley's not even starting. Nick Fairley's a backup.
Yeah. On
this defensive line.
So I find really interesting.
I mean, there's not really a spot for him, to be out there starting on the defensive line, but they have great depth. Guys are always getting injured, and so late game situations, when guys are gassed, goal line situations,
it's gonna
be good to have them in there. Really like what they've done with the defense. With the linebackers, Ogletree and Laurinaitis, and even at the defensive back, some guys coming back from injury.
They've really been I think if any position's been upgraded, I mean, obviously getting Fairley was a big upgrade for the defensive line, but that defensive line would still be a top NFL line without Fairley. But the secondary has been the weak spot for years on this Rams team.
And they got guys coming back too.
Yeah, and there you go.
TJ McDonald's coming back. They still have.
Like I said, EJ Gaines is probably my favorite out of the bunch.
It's a good young defense that they have. That they're definitely going to have to hope performs well game in, game out, because that's their specialty. If the defense doesn't perform well, then it's hard for the offense when they don't have a whole lot of weapons at the wide receiver position. To be determined how this 2-back system of Gurley and Trey Mason goes, and what we can expect from Nick Foles down the road. So the season, a lot of people are just tossing away, for the big reason being the stadium situation, and
Yeah.
there have been new developments out of the stadium
Yes,
situation.
there have been.
I'll let you talk about a little bit about that.
Recently, for those that don't know, and I don't know how many don't know, but there's been a big controversy regarding will the National Football League return to its roots back in Los Angeles. Now, it's been over 20 years since the Rams were in Los Angeles. They came here in 1995. And they've obviously been here since, but ever since then, there has been that determination from Los Angeles to get the team back, or at least, at the very least, a team. Now, recently, the 75-year-old racetrack known as Hollywood Park in Inglewood, California, was demolished. The point of it being demolished was so the owner of the Rams, Stan Kroenke, can build an 80,000-seat stadium in Los Angeles, which is planned to host the Rams. Not this year, obviously, but next year. And the amount of controversy the whole entire situation has brought is just unbelievable, hasn't it, Nick?
It really has. My whole opinion on this whole thing, though, is that until something happens, I'm not going to believe anything.
Yeah.
A lot of LA reporters saying, the Rams are definitely going out there. You have St. Louis guys saying, they're staying here in St. Louis. Kroenke hasn't spoken yet on the situation. I'm not really going to believe anything until one thing happens one way or another. What would I would love to see the Rams stay. What do I think is going to happen? I think they do end up moving to LA, and if for some reason that isn't the case, that Rams do stay here, I could see Kroenke trying to sell the team, because Kroenke's a guy that has a lot of other franchises, has a stake in Arsenal, has the Colorado Avalanche. I could see him if the league blocks him. A lot of different things have to happen before a final decision is made. Zoning laws, voting in each city, a lot of things, a lot of moving parts. So it's a pretty confusing situation. But at the end of the day, no one really knows until something becomes official, and that's going to take the owners, Mr. Roger Goodell, and people from each of the officials from each of the two cities to figure it out and make it work. Down the line, we'll wait and see what happens.
And it's interesting because the race is actually on. It's not just that LA's trying to build a stadium. We're trying to build a stadium right here in St. Louis. Right on the riverfront of the Mississippi River, they're trying to get a stadium built. St. Louis is. There's controversy surrounding it trying to be blocked. And, Tim Kaiser back there recently was telling us that a lot of people have criticized Stan Kroenke for not raising his voice. That's why people calling him Silent Stan. But at the same time, he brought up the point that at least he's not lying to people. At least he's not being vocal. He's just going through motions, or people are just they're taking no words that he said and making stories out of them.
And that's smart on his part, because being in the business of journalism, I know what kind of the mind of the reporter is, and anything he say, they are gonna misconstrue it and try and twist it into a story that's something that it's not. So smart on his part by just keeping his mouth shut and not saying anything, because it might aggravate the reporters, might aggravate St. Louis community, LA community, whoever. But good on his part. If he doesn't want to talk about it, it's nobody's business whether he's being a douche about it or not. It's like it's his team to try and do what he wants with it. But ultimately, we don't know anything until something becomes official.
Right. And then another issue is not just would the Rams move to Los Angeles, but there's two other teams that are in the mix for potentially moving, whether it be to Los Angeles and even possibly one to St. Louis.
Yep.
And those two teams are the Oakland Raiders and the San Diego Chargers. Now, the Chargers and the Raiders have recently proposed a deal at the NFL owners' meetings. It's a stadium that is actually so new complex that it would actually host both teams.
Yeah.
And I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
My thing in there is, when you look back at this whole Los Angeles situation, is Oakland and San Diego were the first two in line, if you will, to get a new stadium to move to Los Angeles, and so I could see a joint move there. If the Rams were to stay in St. Louis, not the Rams were to go, there is talk that the Raiders could potentially come here, and that really would hurt me because as a St. Louis Rams fan, it's good to see the team is finally, again, kind of like the Blues. They say, oh, the Rams going to be good this year? Probably not. But the Rams are really building something something of a good team.
They need to get
now.
over that hump. They're right there.
They do, and I think they finally put some of the final pieces on the puzzle, and it would kind of stink to see the Rams go to Los Angeles and then get the Raiders, who are kind of in phase one of that rebuilding process, to have it start all over again. Right. As for the Chargers, I don't think there's any chance the Chargers come to St. Louis.
I don't think there's any chance of them moving to LA. I see them staying.
Yeah, I would for the Chargers, San Diego. I think they would stay there. I would definitely agree with that.
Like, the only reason why I think Oakland could, I honestly don't believe any team will move to Los Angeles. For the time being, I don't see any team.
Not any team in 2006. No. You think no one will move?
Not at least, and at the very least, not in 2016.
What about 2017?
See, there's where it all depends on what 2015 to 2016 brings. Then there could be new developments. But if I had to pick a team, it would be the Raiders. It wouldn't be the Rams. It'd be the Raiders because they're the only team in all of football that still shares a stadium.
I think Oakland needs to go. I think Oakland needs to go to Los Angeles, and Oakland's the whole city, and it's just I feel like Oakland would be the best fit to go to a new stadium. It's kind of a dumpy stadium right now.
Yeah. Well, they still share it with the Athletics, and that's the thing. That's why I think they go. The St. Louis, they don't share with Busch Stadium.
Is not that great. It's just not a good stadium, in my opinion. It's
a well-known, it's a classic stadium,
old and run down, and definitely need a renovation. So I think I would like to see the Raiders go. More obviously, that's being biased opinion, saying St. Louis, we want to keep the Rams. But even if the Raiders, Chargers, whatever happens, I mean, the Jaguars also are a potential team that talks to move to St. Louis. Their owner has shown somewhat of an interest if the pieces were to fall in the right ways.
Well, he was in the running to even buy the Rams after Georgia Frontier passed away.
So we should see. So a lot going on with the Rams. A lot going on in the. You have anything to add else on the Rams?
Well, there is one more because, and when I said that I don't see a team move, and it's not when I said I think the Raiders could. It's not biased towards me wanting to keep the Rams. It's just I find it interesting that the NFL. St. Louis, Oakland's not even that huge of a city when you compare it to especially to some of the others in California. And then you look at St. Louis. Obviously, it's not a big city. Yeah, it's the second largest in Missouri, but it's one of the top 30th something largest in the country. But then you have the NFL, who doesn't like the fact really that it's in a middle market. Yeah. But then you take Major League Baseball, and they love the fact that we're in a middle market.
Well,
and a lot of it is because of the attendance that Cardinal games rack in. They rack in between 2,900,000 plus a year to well into 3 millions. Now the question I have for you, and then I'll give my answer to it. What do you think about the attendance the Rams will get this year for home games?
That's a really great question because you were talking about the Cardinals being in a mid-market. I think the Cardinals are such a storied franchise, and that's why they're successful. They've been a successful franchise for decades.
Since they started.
For decades, yeah. They've been a solid franchise. Whereas you look at the Rams, the Rams haven't been around that long. And so it's kind of easier for them.
Well, they've been around since the 30s, but the thing of it is that
they haven't been in St. Louis, is what I'm saying. They haven't been in St. Louis that long. So it makes it easier for them to return to LA. And for the NFL, NFL, such a big market, sporting money. I mean, money runs sports. That's the fact of the matter.
Yep.
Money runs sports. No ifs, ands, or buts. You can't argue that. And for the NFL to not have a team in Los Angeles is ridiculous.
They probably cry about it, honestly.
Why they didn't put one there when the Rams exited for St. Louis,
Instead giving
teams
to Carolina.
There could be. I'm not sure the history on that.
Legal.
A little bit before my time there. But for them at this point in time, not having a team in Los Angeles, they're losing so much money there. It's such a huge market, and TV markets, TV dollars are so much more of a bigger deal than they used to be. And for Los Angeles to be one of the top two markets for TV deals, whichever team goes there, every team in the NFL wants to go there. Would enjoy going there because of the TV deal that they're going to get. They're going to get so much money from being in Los Angeles and from that TV deal. That's why Kroenke wants to go there. Whereas you're in St. Louis and you don't have that same, you're on a secondary market. So as far as fan attendance goes, I think you still get the loyalty of the super loyal fans. But outside of that, I think attendance is actually going to be pretty sparse because what we've seen from our comments boards on the Facebook page, Arch City Sports, and on our Twitter page at Arch City Sports, is a lot of the fans don't really care right now. They're like, oh, they're leaving. In a lot of fans' minds, the Rams are already out the door. They've already left, even though that's not the case yet. So fan attendance at the Edward Jones Dome, they need a renovation or a new stadium, and there's so much.
That's why they
more.
have these new plans for a new stadium.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more of a story behind it, where the money's coming from, etc. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is that I think a lot of fans feel as though Kroenke is cheating them, and that he's already moved on to LA. And until there's a change of ownership or an official yes or no, they're leaving, going, yes or no, we're getting a new stadium, they're not getting a new stadium, I don't think attendance will be all that great.
And see, that's why when you were talking about the markets and the ratings and the money, that's why, unbiasedly, I would say, well, honestly, there's no such thing as an unbiased opinion. Everything does have bias in it.
I would agree.
Even if somebody is coming from a neutral standpoint, they still choose to have that bias on the neutral spectrum. But the reason I think Oakland, if any team would move, is because look at all the teams in California. If you take the market size of cities like San Francisco, San Diego, and where it would be for Los Angeles, that covers up California and a lot of the states east of it.
Yeah.
Now, you take out St. Louis, I mean, there's a lot of cities like Western Tennessee, Arkansas. You got some of the other ones in the Midwest. So it's a good market size. It's not that it's the large one, but it does cover a lot of areas that wouldn't get the games anyway.
And the fact of the matter is, St. Louis is a baseball town. It always will be. It will be a baseball town, and Blues, Rams will all be second or third. So I think a lot of times the city sees the Blues, the Rams, who haven't been successful playoff teams, is a little bit more expendable than the Cardinals because they will never be better than the Cardinals. So I think the NFL, a lot of people think that St. Louis can just get away with just having the Cardinals and the Blues and not having to have the Rams.
You need
Whereas,
more.
in my opinion, it's still a great football city. It's a great, St. Louis.
There's still those loyal fans there.
St. Louis is a great soccer city.
Yeah.
You've got to give a shout out to the St. Louis FC and the soccer guys. I mean, you look at
and there's a chance that they may be, and there's a chance Major League Soccer is.
Yeah, because with this new stadium and success of the soccer team St. Louis FC and the USL Pro League so far, I mean, down the road they could have a team, and that's a big factor for the stadium too. Is it going to be a
multi-sport
stadium? Exactly. So.
And I think the scheduling between, say if that stadium gets built, the Rams move in, and St. Louis FC moves into there too, or just like a Major League Soccer team. Well, the scheduling for those two would be a lot more flexible than it would be if you're like the Raiders in the Coliseum sharing it with the Athletics.
Exactly. So, that will be figured out down the road. But we'll move on to the Missouri Tigers, a little college football.
Yep.
Again, this is the post-game brought to you by ArchCitySports.com. Jeremy Karp along with Nick Yale talking all the St. Louis sports. If you have any ideas or comments about the post-game or anything you want us to talk about, you can tweet us at ArchCitySports, at Nick Yale, and at JCarpSportsFan1 on Twitter, or go onto our Facebook page, Arch City Sports, and leave us a comment if there's anything that you want us to talk about. So moving on to the Missouri Tigers, back-to-back SEC East champions. Obviously, this hits home, being the Mizzou beat writer and being out there for.
You're jumping with joy.
I am jumping with joy. It's been my fourth year moving out there in Columbia. The fans do appreciate the football team. Basketball team is not doing very well. That's a different story. But hopefully Kim Anderson can turn those guys around next season. I definitely have faith that he can. With the Missouri Tigers football team, though, Gary Pinkel, back-to-back SEC East championships. Moving into next season, it should be interesting because Matty Mock will be in his second full season as the starting quarterback. James Franklin, obviously, before Matty Mock. We saw flashes of Matty Mock a couple seasons ago in his time when he replaced the injured Franklin. But last year he was full-time starter, performed okay. It
wasn't anything to be outstanding.
He had 13 interceptions.
Yeah.
So looking at that, if Mock, my opinion of Mock is he's a great quarterback, or a good quarterback, I shouldn't say great quarterback. He can carry the team. but he has to be smart with his decision making. Has to have smarter throws. Has to really take control of this team because this is a young squad. It's a young group of Missouri Tigers, and the defense is phenomenal. But looking at this offense, they have Jamon Moore and Nate Brown. Those are the two guys that got a little bit of action last year. They have Justin Smith, 6'7" wide receiver coming out of Tennessee. Should be a good addition, and a couple other guys as well. So a lot of these young wide receivers are inexperienced, don't have much playing time at that wide receiver position coming into college. So with the exception of Brown and Moore, so Matty Mock's really going to have to control this team as a whole.
And good you brought up that point. It's hard for a quarterback, like you said. He wasn't great last year. He was good, but he showed flashes of a really, really top quarterback, and at least the SEC at the very least. Not so much in all of college football. We're not jumping the gun that high. But the point of it is, he does have that good addition in Justin Smith, but he really does have to have better awareness when he's whether he's in the pocket or he's scrambling out of it. He can really scramble out of the pocket well, but when he's out there, especially out of the pocket, because your linemen either shift or they don't, and you got a defensive lineman coming towards you, you got to still make a quick release, but not a quick reaction, or else you will most likely, if the receiver is being covered, will throw an interception. So that's what he's really got to do if he wants to be successful this year.
Yeah, you made the great point about him rushing out of the pocket, and from watching his tape and stuff, that's the biggest thing is he jumps the gun. He's scrambling out of the pocket when the pressure's not there, so he's a little bit tentative. Whereas he steps up and delivers that throw, then he's going to make better passes, better decision making, better throws down throughout the game. So should he improve? Probably. Will he improve? Probably. Having that 1 year of experience certainly helps. So it's just a matter of building off that for next year and really taking control of this team and knowing that he has a full year under his belt. I think it's going to really help him.
Now, on the defensive side of the ball, you're talking about how good they've been. But here's one big question I have for you. What does Mizzou, I should say, do from here with the loss of Shane Ray, as he's now been drafted by the Denver Broncos?
Well, you look at both Shane Ray and Marcus Golden. Ray going to the Broncos, Golden going to the Cardinals. Big question here, obviously. Wrote an article about it. You can check it out. Check it out online at archcitysports.com, as well as all our other great content from our wonderful group of writers. If you're interested in writing for us, you can go to archcitysports.com and fill out a form to send, and you could potentially become a archcitysports.com contributor. But when you look at this defensive line, this defensive end position specifically, year before, going back a year prior, Coney Ealy, Michael Sam, both great defensive ends, and college careers, for instance. Coney Ealy performing in the NFL. Obviously, Michael Sam now.
He's in the CFL now.
Up in the CFL with the Montreal Alouettes. And then you lose Golden and Ray, both probably guys that'll be starting on their respective teams. So looking at the depth chart, you have Charles Harris and you have Marcus Loud. That was supposed to be who was going to be the two starting guys. Both have a little bit of experience. Loud was Golden's backup. But now it's changed a little bit. Loud was dismissed from the team for a violation of team rules.
Yep.
So Loud is no longer with the Missouri Tigers. So right now you have Charles Harris and then a big question mark at the other side. And there's a number of guys you can look at that defensive end position. Terry Beckner Jr., top guy coming out of East St. Louis. Number 1, number 2, rated overall recruit, depending on where you look at. Rivals.com, ESPN had him rated a little bit differently. But this guy is going to be the talk of the town, been the talk of Columbia. Right now, Gary Pinkel and Coach Craig Kulagowski are probably going to use Beckner Jr. at the defensive tackle position. He's a little bit slower, but if they can work him in there at D-tackle and at defensive end. So they have a number of options looking at the defensive end position. A lot of no-name guys that you really haven't heard of yet. You can go read that article. It'll tell you a little bit in depth about some of those guys. But at the defensive end position right now, will they be as good as next season? Probably not. But the fact of the matter is they'll still be very great on defense. Brought in Barry Odom from Memphis to be the new defensive coordinator with the departure of Coach Steck. Dave Steckel going down to be the new head coach of Missouri State. So they got a new defensive coordinator. Might switch it up a little bit. Might not, to be determined. They've in spring practice currently. Been working some new things, new systems out. But the fact of the matter is the defense is going to ride. Is what Missouri's going to ride. That's their success. Kind of like the Rams. It's going to be what their success is going to be.
That's why they do say defensive wins championships.
Yeah, D lines do. Is who is going to next step up? Who can step up? They got a lot of young D backs that are going to have to come fill those shoes as well. Arion Penton out of CBC, just to name one of the guys that Kenyon Dennis, each are really going to have to come up and perform, because that was Mizzou's weak spot in their loss against South Carolina at home on homecoming 2 years ago. And throughout last season, was some of where they struggled a little bit. So the defense is going to have to has some big shoes to fill, certainly. Yeah. And when you look at Missouri, they have won 2 SEC East championships, but a lot of people are still hating on them. A lot of people aren't going to give them the credit that they deserve. And I think until they defeat an SEC West opponent, much tougher division, and win an SEC championship outright, that they're not going to get the respect that they deserve. Everybody in Columbia believes in them.
Well, yeah, but everybody outside of Columbia, everyone's going to want to, and obviously there's plenty of fans outside of Columbia that like Mizzou, but they really want to see that big result, kind of like a team trying to climb its way with the talent they have. But if they don't win the big one, it honestly doesn't matter, because they won't get that respect that they deserve. My old high school at Francis House Central, there was a quote we had during football. It was, "You only deserve what you earn." And until they, earn that, they won't get the respect.
And I think like everybody in Columbia knows they're legit. I believe they're legit. It's a great football program. They were one win away from going to the national championship against Florida State 2 years ago. They weren't ever going to win that game against Auburn. They came close. Give them good credit because they came close. That South Carolina homecoming game ended up being a moot point. But when you're at home and you're losing games against Indiana like they did last year, Indiana lost. Indiana only won 2 games last season.
Those are the ones that brings out the doubters more than ever.
Yeah, they have to, and I think that's where Matty Mock really has to control the team, control the offense, take charge, be the leader that that I know he can be, because you can't be losing games against non-con opponents. Your non-con opponents, your so-called cupcake games, are the ones that you have to win. Your tune-ups before you go and play the Georgias, the Floridas, the Tennessees, because they beat Florida 2 years in a row. Yeah, they beat Georgia 2 years ago, lost to them last year, and they beat Texas A&M. Yeah, they beat all these teams when they were kind of in weak spots. But these teams are coming back better than ever. Florida's going to be back better than ever. Tennessee's had probably one of the best recruiting classes of this past season. So the Tigers are going to have their hands full in the SEC East and in the SEC as a whole. So they really have to focus on making sure they take those so-called cupcake games as seriously as they're taking the SEC games, because a loss in a non-conference game against a Toledo or against an Indiana or an Arkansas State, that could end up costing them an SEC East, or not an SEC East championship, but
just a bid,
a bid even, or a deep making a playoff run, getting the SEC championship as a whole. So we should wait and see there. But I think that's a little bit all we have for today.
Yeah,
Jeremy, it was a
very good first episode.
It was a very good first episode,
and we look forward to many more.
And as always, you can follow us at Arch City Sports on Twitter. At JCarpSportsFan1 is Jeremy on Twitter. I'm at Nick Yale. And you can like us on Facebook at Arch City Sports. Again, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, feel free to tweet at us, mention us, and give us a like, and we'll continue this podcast. Hopefully, everybody appreciates it. We appreciate Mick letting Mick the
head of the website,
head operator,
he's
owner
the one for all
the fearless leader, Mick Light, for letting us use his garage, and Tim Kaiser, who's been out and about chilling with us. So we'll be back hopefully sometime next week. And thanks for listening.
Take care, everybody.